What are some lessons you've learned from Haruki Murakami?
Murakami is a great novelist, a celebrated novelist. I learned a lot from him about writing fiction, honestly. Like nothing much beyond that. But, he's known for these really wild, surreal, fantastical stories. But what I learned from him personally as a writer was how his attention to detail drew you into a scene. So when he's describing a character that walks into a room, he takes his time to really describe that character in detail, what they're wearing, what their facial expressions are, and even like what they're eating.
Yes.
I realized
the food stuff to me is exactly that. Yeah.
I realized from him and some other fiction writers, and I'm not even a fiction writer really, but I dabble in lots of things in poetry. So as in writing in general, it really helps to put someone in their body, because reading can be such a mental, abstract thing to do. You're just like in your own head. But when you describe food, temperature, colors, and details, and you're having someone feel something in their body. So when you talk about like taking a bite of food and like, filling your belly, kind of you feel that in your belly. So you take a second, you get out of your head and into your body. And that's a good technique for fiction and for writing in general, and even for podcasting. It's not keeping it all up in your head, but like integrating the body in that consumption experience.
Dude, without a doubt. And I love when he's describing food, like he'll go for like a page and a half. It'll be like, it was a white fish that you picked up at the market this day, and it's like just done in this like way, blah, blah, blah. And he ends it all with, it was a simple meal. It's like you just took a page and a half to describe something that you described.
Right.
It's so Japanese also, to be like, it was a simple meal.
But then you're in the room.
Yes.
You're in the room. So it's funny because he's known for these, like I said, these abstract, surrealistic stories. But what I took away from him was the really grounded, simple, approach to describing detail.
100%. I think the Japanese do a very specifically good example of, with simple, either from, if you look at, most of Studio Ghibli or Akira, all the way to Murakami's writing, or to some different artwork, you could say like Kusama's artwork, it's like dealing with something as abstract as surrealism or dreams and doing it in a way that people can actually connect with through simplicity, either simple language, simple imagery.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not an expert on a lot of Japanese art, but I do like how it has that close proximity to Zen Buddhism.
Yeah, for sure.
That's like, even if it's not directly Zen influenced, there is some of that simplicity, clarity in a lot of Japanese art and writing that I appreciate personally.
Yeah, I just got deja vu a bit.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like we've been here before.
I know.
James McCrae, welcome to the podcast.
Hey.
How would you describe what you do?
Well, I'm a writer, is how I would describe what I do. My writing takes a lot of forms. I've written a few books. I think at my most core creative being, I'm a poet. I've been writing poetry since I was like 14 years old. And that's not the main modality I work in at the moment, but that's kind of my home base as a creative. But I'm also an artist and a visual designer. I went to an art school, used to work professionally as a graphic designer. So I bring in design elements to my writing and try to combine them, which is why the format of the internet meme has been, a very successful and robust creative medium for me, because I combine the design and the writing. So I'm a multi-dimensional creative, but at my core, I'm a writer and a poet. Yeah.
I love that. The guy who I was mentioning before the podcast that did the documentary on Marcel Duchamp, he's done like 50 documentary films, but he calls himself a sculptor. And he studied like to be a sculpturist. I don't know. Sculptor. It is just a sculptor. Okay.
I guess.
Yeah. But he thinks about it as the medium of art with the least bounds, because it's kind of like sculpting anything. I was like, oh, that's cool.
Oh, you're kind of sculpting reality.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And I like about sculpting, I'll say that the sculptor doesn't create anything. They remove what's already there. It's a block of stone.
Yeah.
They don't add anything to it. They chip it away until what's essential remains.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good metaphor for even us as people. It's like, to become the beautiful, idealized sculpture of ourselves, we don't need to add anything. We just need to chisel away everything that doesn't belong.
Yeah. That like that's not like serving us anymore. Yeah, I think about via negativo a lot. Like it's like through removing you like see growth, just because especially here in Austin and like in the cultures that we both exist in different levels, so many people are searching for something they need to add to get them to that next place from A to B or to remove or whatever. And sometimes it seems like maybe the best thing to test is removing first.
Oh, I love that. I couldn't agree more. I think we're all conditioned to seek achievement and success and validation outside of ourselves. But I'm just kind of a minimalist in general in my life, in my art, and in my spirituality. So I think it's already there. I think it's just about cultivating that inner presence. And when you let that light grow within you, it's going to just, speak for itself.
Yeah. So you went to art school and you see yourself as an artist now. And there's a time period, though, where you were doing graphic design for advertising companies, I have to assume. Where do you see the difference, if you do think there's a difference or a tension between art and propaganda?
Art and propaganda. Propaganda is an attempt to manipulate. I like to believe that art is an attempt to tell the truth. So I think there's something similar about them. I mean, I think of propaganda as a type of broadcast media. It's, I've heard it said that like art is a lie that tells the truth. And like, you could say that like, and some things are their truth, but they're made to tell a lie or to deceive or to manipulate.
Yeah.
So propaganda at its core is just, I talk about memes in my new book. And I think propaganda is a weaponized meme. So a meme is a viral idea, something you're trying to spread in the culture. And art is inherently a meme because art, it has a message, and the art form is the carrier of that message. You could go say something to people in real life and try to convince them of an idea, and that might fall flat. But when you can encode a message or a meaning inside a work of art, whether that's poetry or a painting or a movie, that's going to help that idea be more digestible and help it spread and infiltrate the culture. So that's what memes are. Ideas that infiltrate the culture and go viral. And propaganda is an attempt to do that for what I would consider nefarious means, usually, which is trying to, spread a message of your own, choosing that is going to move the culture in a certain direction. And that's typically, when you talk about propaganda, it's usually in terms of like limiting the freedom of the people. So I like to think that, art and poetry, they're keys that help unlock someone's mind and expand their consciousness. Whereas propaganda is more of an attempt to put people's minds inside of a box, make them behave a certain way, and to, put a limit onto their consciousness in a way that you're trying to, manipulate them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely see that. I like to, one of the things I've been trying to understand or work through is around Pablo Picasso, because I think like as a child, his skill set was just like phenomenal. And then, Spanish Civil War breaks out. The Catholic Church kind of turns on its populace, which like really fractures society. Spain ends up bombing its own population. Picasso's artistic reaction to that is what I would call like Guernica. And that is just like almost like pure expression at the cost of him making that statement, could be the cost of his life potentially. And then fast forward, like 40 years and He's just like painting roosters as fast as he can, signing it and getting a bag. And I think of like within one artist, you can have like the propagandist and the artist, because it's like when he was no longer creating, he was doing it for another reason. It wasn't because he had to. It was because I'm going to get a bag and I'm old now kind of vibe. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but when was Picasso a propagandist?
When he was just literally, there's like videos of him where he would just paint the same rooster over and over again, sign him like on a conveyor belt basically, and then sell it for a bag.
I hear that's like, but that's not, I don't think that's propaganda. That's just commercialization.
So I think that, again, I've been working through this, and thank you for the pushback. The reason I find it propaganda, because the term that's made the most sense to me that encompasses it, all of it, is art is when you're at the edge of your skis, like you don't really know what's going to happen, but you're in pure creation. The moment you become a meta of yourself, the moment there is an end outside the means of creation, is when it switches from art to propaganda. So even if I approach this, like, you know, I loosely wrote a bunch of questions or thoughts, we've already gotten like far off of them. If I would have just forced myself to stick to this and read it and like, yeah, so like Don Lemon interviewing Elon Musk, just like trying to get something out of it so he could get like an outcome versus like, what is coming to me right now? What are the questions that I can ask you? Like, that's where I view the tension, because the line gets really fuzzy when you think about, let's just say like the internet, because, you know, when Logan Paul was making these very creative, very intense pieces of content where it was him trying to like entertain people, versus when now he's trying to think about how can I leverage the entertainment to sell Prime. And those two things are very different.
Sure.
And that's where I think it went from art to propaganda in that idea.
I feel you. I'd have to look up the definition of propaganda. I think propaganda for me and my definition requires a bit more intended manipulation and deliberate misleading, whereas selling a bunch of quick rooster paintings, it's just more like commercialized art. It's maybe more shallow art, certainly, than Guernica.
Yeah.
But he's not trying to manipulate, deceive, or spread a meme that is trying to misdirect and deceive people. So, because then I think we would need another word for that. Because, like, you know, when I think of art and propaganda, I think of Germany during World War II, when there was a lot of new advancements in art, like in abstraction and abstract impressionism, and a lot of innovation happening in art. And Hitler really wanted to promote traditional German values, right? So he forbid any form of these new innovative art forms, whether it's, you know, Dada or Expressionism or Surrealism, and he would only allow people to paint and to sell and display these like traditional German, you know, scenes. And he was intentionally stunting innovation within the art field and trying to limit people's minds to this traditional German mindset. And I think that is more propaganda, because he's trying to engineer a society in a certain way. You know, Picasso, I guess that was just his period where he's trying to, you know, like you said, get a bag, sell all his hot. And then we see Andy Warhol, you know, a couple decades later, who made a whole career and living off of commercialized art. And I love Andy Warhol as well. So
but I mean, his art, though, if you think about like his specific like replicas, right?
Yeah.
They were very in the style of propaganda as well.
That's true.
Like literally the imagery was like making, almost poking fun at like old propaganda. And then it was like these replicas as well. And yeah, I mean, so like to the history of propaganda. So it started with in 14th century, basically there was, in Catholicism, there was a literal unit within like the Vatican that was like responsible for propagation of the faith. So that was like the first like birth of the term. And then basically like Edward Bernays, who wrote like the book Propaganda, and like kind of he connects it from there all the way to where we're at now. And again, I really think there probably should be a different term for what Picasso did, but it's just, I think there's something within the creation process that dictates it. So in one of the areas I find the most convoluted around this is if you go to, if you think about the great artists of like the Renaissance era, they were all patrons of the church. So like they were both doing art because they were trying to create the best thing they could possibly create, but it was paid for by somebody else and was propaganda to maybe something they didn't even recognize or believe in.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the great Renaissance, all of the great Renaissance art were commissions.
Yeah.
And they were typically commissions by the Medici family.
Yeah.
And they were meant to spread. And even some of the earliest poetry ever.
Really?
Some of the earliest poetry ever is from the Roman Empire. And poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid were specifically commissioned by the Caesar at that time to spread the tale of the Roman Empire and the glory of the Roman Empire. And they were written specifically as that. And now they're celebrated as, amazing works of literary history, but they were literally bought and paid for by the Roman Empire.
Yeah. That's one area I really got to go to try and figure out this definition. Go way deeper into that area. Cause I just don't know how to hold that tension in my head.
Yeah. I think it's artists in every era work within certain restrictions. I used to work in advertising, right? So by your definition, that's a form of propaganda because I'm applying my creativity to serve business needs. Mm-hmm. Every creator and every artist in every generation has to live and work within certain restrictions. Mm. And whether that's having a benefactor who's helping to pay for it, or, in Picasso's case, being able to sell to clients and to have, even Guernica, yes, that was a pure expression of what he felt at the time. And he was, portraying this act of horror, which happened in his country. But he also knew people are going to pay attention to this.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's eyeballs that he's doing it for, and, a client at the end of it. So, I think it's good and important for artists to have pure intentions behind their work. But realistically, if someone is doing work for a client or, wants to sell their work, I don't think that puts any type of tarnish on their creativity. I think that's just, we live in a world that is not just about ourselves. It's a whole ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So it's like artists have a role in an ecosystem. So it's not just like dance like no one's watching.
Yeah.
Like, what is the role of your art in a society, in an economy, in a culture? Mm-hmm. There's like a discussion happening back and forth with all of these things. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's okay to sell art or to make money for the specific purpose of selling it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that necessarily puts any, if you make a movie, you want people to watch it. I don't think that makes it propaganda. Yeah. So I'm giving the artist a little more leeway than
Yeah, I have a pretty idealistic view on this, but it's not that I hold it as in like black and white. I look at it as an index and a spectrum, and it's like, okay, how are we pushing towards the art? And then when are we pushing away? And I just think about myself internally when it feels better and feels worse. Do I, again, I can't know Picasso's thing. I did take a whole class on him in Valencia, Spain, which was awesome. And it was very fun. And I learned a lot of wild shit about that dude because he's a wild man. Yeah. But I have to imagine, it was the difference between making love and masturbating. Do you know what I mean? Sure. There's a big difference in how it feels.
Sure. Well, that's why Guernica is displayed and celebrated in museums and in art books, and those rooster paintings aren't.
Yeah. I don't know who has those, but someone does. Okay, when you're thinking of memes, I don't know if this counts as a meme, but I think it was I think for sure Marcel Duchamp had the first meme, but I'm not going to refer to that yet. But I also, at the Picasso Museum, just to stay on this in Barcelona, there's a stone, in the courtyard, and it says, "Great artists steal. Pablo Picasso." And then it's scratched out, and underneath it says Banksy. And I love that. It was so perfect. You know what I mean? It was Banksy actually created this, put it in there, and then but it does fit. And there is this thing about replications in art and about taking something old and making it new. And I feel like one of the superpowers you have in your book is almost curating all of these ideas in a way that makes sense for people to actually consume versus this disparate thought that exists in all these different bubbles across history.
Yeah, that's certainly my intention because I'm a student of art history and I did no research for my book because I have been doing the research my whole life.
Yeah.
I've always been, watching every documentary on every artist and going to all the museums and reading biographies about my favorites. And even when I'm on YouTube, I'm typically watching interviews with artists, whether that's like old David Bowie, rare interviews from the 70s, or watching Apple Music interviews with Zane Lowe and SZA or whatever today.
Yeah.
And I'm always just absorbing that. So that was one of my favorite parts about this book, was being able to share all of these stories that I have found so much value in, and like packaging them up in a book where they're all in one place.
Yeah. How did you think through sequencing? Because I do think in communication, the thing I struggle with the most is sequencing. I don't think very linearly. And how did you, because I feel like yours was sequenced very well. How did you think through that?
By sequencing, do you mean just like the order of the book and the chapters? So the chapters were, the sequencing in a way was the whole insight that inspired the book in the beginning. So before I even had an idea to write The Art of You, which is like all about reclaiming your creativity and really unlocking the steps of the creative process, no matter what form your art takes, if you're a musician, an author, a poet, an artist, a podcaster, what are the steps that the creative process goes through? And this was the first spark of the book. And I was like, okay, so on one hand, creativity is very spiritual. Because when you think about where do ideas come from, there's like a spark of inspiration that I believe comes from our intuition. And I think our intuition is our portal to the higher self. If you want to be religious, you could call it God. Some people call it interdimensional beings.
Yeah, aliens for sure.
For sure. Some people are out there channeling aliens, and I'm like, or you have a good intuition. In ancient Greece, they called it the muse. I think these are all just metaphors for our intuition. So that's a very like inner work. It's very spiritual. It's about cultivating your own consciousness. But then creativity is also about craft and craftsmanship and making and building. So I really started to unpack how creativity works. And the first big insight of that is it's the yin and the yang, meaning it's the feminine and the masculine. It's the receptive and it's the active. So every creative process, it starts in the yin, which is about cultivating intuition. It's about cultivating consciousness and preparing the soil for the plants to grow. So what's included in yin, it's things like, and these are all chapters of the book, it starts off with doing nothing, because before you can create work with purpose and meaning and intention, we live in a society with a lot of distractions. So it's really important to extract ourselves from those distractions and reclaim the sovereignty over our own consciousness. So that's why the first chapter of the book is the art of doing nothing.
Yeah.
It's just like restoring your energy, reclaiming your consciousness so you can be more autonomous in your thinking and your speaking and your doing.
What are some ways that you try to practice that, or you recommend practicing that?
Well, for me, I went through this transformation in my life when I was living in New York City, when there's so much chaos all around you.
Yeah.
So I sought out ways to keep that inner peace and that balance when the world around me was so chaotic. So that's when I got into meditation, Kundalini yoga. That's when I began to experiment with psychedelics, whether that's microdosing or macrodosing. And, spending time in nature, reading things like, I love to read books like the Tao Te Ching or like the poetry of Hafez. Things that really help to cultivate like an inner presence and just slowing down and just like returning to your own internal center. So there's so many different ways to do that. And and then what else goes into yin? It's just like setting an intention, using your imagination, using your emotions. You know, so these are all things that happen before you even like put your brush to the canvas or like start to type out your book. It's like getting all of your inner world prepared so that outer world can grow from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the yang is things like how to develop your own style, how to experiment with technique, how to launch projects, how to make money from your work, how to achieve some type of social impact with your work. These are all things that happen by doing and by action. So I was just thinking about the kind of the linear but not linear process that the creative process takes. So that's how the sequencing came about. It was just these are the stages it takes to be an artist or to make art of any sort. Yeah.
It feels like in our culture right now, we're like so yang oriented.
Yeah.
And it is like the hardest thing in the world to ask somebody to do nothing. And
yeah,
one of the ways that I've been trying to implement this into my existence, like consistently, and I've had super fun ways of doing it, and this is one that I've landed on that I've liked a lot, is like I'll do like a 12-hour silent walk, where it's like no phone, no audiobooks, just a journal, me, some snacks, and no goal of the walk.
12 hours.
12 hours, yeah. You end up walking about a marathon, which is cool.
In nature or in the city? Doesn't matter.
I'll usually go in and out, you know. Like my whole goal is to set out with no plan and just, oh, that looks interesting. I'm going to go left, or I'm going to go 90 degrees, or like, you know what I mean? Just
Yes.
like, I'm going to go sit over on that place for a while. I'm going to stretch there. And it's funny because what's crazy is the first few times I did it, I think I was in such a parasympathetic state that it was like massive breakthroughs, like all of these thoughts, like all of these things I was journaling felt like it like even if I always film a video at the beginning, at the end, like you see a different sky when you're looking at the face of it. And then like most recently it's just like, you know, maybe an insight, but really I'm just having fun. It's just actually just like, oh, I'm just playing around.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love how when you remove so many of the stimulation and distractions, even like walking without headphones, you're kind of tuning in to a different level. It's kind of like when you're fasting, like that absence of that stimulus that you're used to in terms of eating and digesting, you just become more sensitive
100%
to what's happening around you.
Yeah.
So it's the same with walking. I do the same thing sometimes, not for 12 hours. I love that. But I love to, you know, it's like, there's a Buddhist tradition of walking meditation. You know, we think that meditation has to look a certain way, but just walking in nature is a form of meditation.
Yeah.
And so is, even if you do want to listen to music, I love the idea of a music meditation, which is like put on headphones, choose a great album, and listen to it with your eyes closed from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And just be there with that music. That's a form of meditation as well, when you're just being present with what is.
Yeah.
And that could be walking, that could be listening to music, it could be whatever.
I know, like when I was in New York, I'd get this chocolate bar all the time, and it described how to eat it. And it was like 12 steps. You know, it was like, feel the foil, break a little piece, smell it, rub it with your fingers, get it warm, then smell it more. Then it's like, notice the colors on the chocolate, like blah, blah, blah. Then finally like, put it in your mouth. And that sounds pretentious, but it made the experience of eating the chocolate so much better than just like watching fucking Netflix, like, oh, nom, 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 high. Like now I'm like both caffeinated and sugar high, and I have no idea what it's put in my body, but whatever. But I do think like, I feel like that if I don't really believe in like good and evil or like enemies and non-enemies necessarily, but I do think the thing I'm most worried about for future children, for how I'm going to pattern that to future children, for society at large, is this constant state of distraction and action versus nothing and reflection. And I feel like that's why I really appreciated that you led with that in the beginning of the book, because I think so many people who want to get ahead who might think, oh, I'm an artist, like I'm going to go to the Yang section, how to launch a product? Fuck yeah, you know what I mean? But really, it's actually maybe the greatest skill you can actually hone right now is literally not doing anything.
Well, this is what I realized, and I didn't have this clarity of an insight until after the book was already finished. But making art of any sort, it's what I would call a creation ritual. So when you want to give birth to something new, how does that happen biologically? It is the integration of the yin and the yang, the feminine principle and the masculine principle have to come together in order for that new life to come forth. And it's the exact same thing that happens in the creative process, because the creative process is similar to childbirth. It's giving birth to something new. And that also requires an integration of the yin and the yang. So you need both. If you need the action too, right? Because if you're just in yin, let's see, if you're just in creative yin, that looks like you're in flow. You're very flowy. You're very inspired, and you're very in touch with your intuition, and you're feeling everything, and you're in that state of feely, flowing inspiration. But if you don't have the yang, the masculine, you're gonna struggle to finish things and to launch them and to get them out into the world. So you need that action. But if you're all action oriented, if you're all yang, you can be like, go, do, launch, but your work is going to suck.
Yeah.
Because it's not grounded in purpose, in intention. It's not being fueled by that intuition. It's going to be shallow. It's going to be just like superficial, and it's not going to have that deep resonance. So to make truly great art, to make anything great, it requires that balance integration of yin and yang.